You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Eric Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Eric.
Hey, this is Josh Mead, and we are glad that you are joining us today. And this month, we're going to be looking at media, technology, social media, all of that good stuff, pros and cons, how you can use it for the benefit of ministry, things like that. But before we get to it, Eric, how's things going in Dominican Republic? How's your family? I heard that they're lifting all restrictions in Dominican Republic. Just 2 days ago, I told my son, Tristan, my oldest, that when we go back on our next furlough, we're going to plan a mission trip to Dominican Republic. Hopefully you guys are there when we do plan that.
Yes.
And he said, well, I'm not going if there's any restrictions or you have to get more testing and stuff or vaccinations. And so anyways, how are things in Dominican Republic? Can we come and visit you freely?
Well, yes. Thankfully, yesterday we got the great news from the president. They were lifting all restrictions on masks and mandates. And so that was really encouraging. And 2 days ago, actually today was the 17th, so I guess it was 3 or 4 days ago, on Valentine's Day, we celebrated 13 years from arriving here in the Dominican Republic. So we called that field-iversary in our family, and we had a little celebration that night, just celebrating what the Lord had allowed us to do here in the last 13 years and what He did in our has done in our ministry. So yeah, things are turning back to what we call normal, and we're very, very thankful for that, especially in the area of ministry. Last week we had a nice couples banquet, which was just kind of a sign that we're getting back to normal, because the last thing we did like that with our couples 2 years ago was right before COVID started. So I praise the Lord that first and foremost, that it's less of the virus around than ever, and that the governments are responding, especially here in turn, and we're able to just enjoy things better than we have in quite some time. How about you guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, here in Senegal, things have been pretty much back to normal, since last year for months. We've been not really any restrictions or requirements or things like that. And so we've been enjoying just seeing ministry slowly getting back on track, getting back into routine. Of course, when you go through a year of lockdown, a lot of things that you had momentum and a lot of ministries, they kind of get pushed off to the wayside. And so getting people back into a routine and a habit of different ministries is great, but we're starting a bunch of new ministries. And next week I had a young man in our church ask me if I can do a theological discussion every week. And so a lot of the young men want to gather for that. Pastor Malik would do it in the past. I did it a long time ago, and then we went on furlough. And so Pastor Malik took over. His wife's about to have a baby, so he's been really busy. And so they asked me to take that back over. So we're going to start that back up. I'm really excited, looking forward to that. We're going to host, and this is part of why we brought up the theme of social media. Next month, we're going to host here at our church a seminar on social media, using media, social media for evangelism. And we're going to kind of give other church leaders in our area a behind the scenes look of how we do social media, how we use it for evangelism. We're going to present kind of step-by-step process of what we do, how we produce our videos, how we use promotions on Facebook and YouTube and different things like that to get the gospel out, and then kind of present a strategy we have to expand our church planting efforts using this medium as one of our primary tools for making contact with either believers and training them, or those who are seeking and giving them a more clear presentation of the gospel. And so we're going to host that seminar next week. Many of our church members are going to come. And I'm also going to start produce some feature-length gospel films. So we need to recruit actors so that we can start putting those videos together. And so it's coming along I'm really excited about how that's developing. But let's jump into that. Let's talk about technology. Of course, early on, we talked about how to develop a missionary presentation. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Just take pictures, put a slide together, and then you just go and click through. I don't know how old do you have to be to remember slides. I remember when
that's before us even.
Yeah, we didn't use slides, but I remember missionaries coming to our church.
Oh yeah.
And using them. And they were fun. It was always fun. Overhead projector, youth group.
Yep.
We would sing songs with transparencies and use teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And technology changes. It advances. As Baptists, I want to ask this question to you, okay, before we get into technology. When something new comes out, a new technology, a new medium, okay, a new form of communication, is it right for Baptists, and maybe speaking specifically to our group of independent Baptists, is it right to be hesitant to jump on board of a new technology right away? Or is there a time when we should jump ahead and get ahead of the ball when a new technology or a new medium of communication comes out? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe try to be a little more specific. You speaking of like interacting with others? Are we talking about like social media? Are we talking about television?
Well, yeah. We're gonna two examples. All right. First of all, yes. Okay. Obviously, when screens came out, people were putting them in their churches. A lot of people were against them. Right now, it's pretty commonly accepted. So my question could apply to the usage of just a technology like a TV, a screen. But I'm more specifically, I guess, speaking to a means of communication such as social media, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat. There's all kinds of means of communication out there. There's always a new one coming out. I remember when Vine was a thing, and that's basically obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
So is it right when a new medium of communication comes out to take a step back and ask some questions and be hesitant to use it before we jump on it and use it right away? I guess that specifically with social media. And let's go all the way back to live streaming services using the internet.
Right.
What do you say? In just kind of a generalization.
Well, I guess the simple answer is, Josh, that when it comes to media, it really a lot of times depends on how we're using it and why we're using it. I think really that's more of an important thing. I think there are certain things maybe early on as far as YouTube and Facebook that people who are maybe closely aligned with us had reasons to not want to use it. But as we just went through a pandemic, boy, am I sure glad that we had those tools, or we wouldn't have been able to reach so many of our people for really 3 months. It was the only contact I had with people. We use something we have in our church for the last 10 years called What's Up or WhatsApp, where the primary way we get information to our church members. We have chats with, men's meeting, with the general church, with the choir. And so I am so thankful to live in an age where we can have mass communication. With that being said, I'm sure we all understand the complications, the possible downfalls to using media or even having access to media, whether it be social media or things like YouTube, Facebook, where there could be things that would negatively impact us. As a pastor and as someone who's in charge of a lot of times teenagers, it's a tough thing sometimes to kind of be on the prowl and trying to help them understand the errors you can make and having access to those things and then putting things on that would cause shame to the name of Christ. And so it really depends on the ways we use things, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about that, but I think it is a case-by-case basis, and I think after going through this pandemic, my opinion probably has dramatically changed about it.
Yeah, so I think it's important that we evaluate for sure the mediums that we're using to communicate. There was a Canadian educator McLaurin, I think, something like that. But he coined the phrase, the medium is the message. And what he was trying to say was that not only is the message we're communicating important, but the means by which we communicate say a lot about the message. And I try to think about that a lot, reflect on that a lot whenever there's a new medium of communication that comes out. But I'm also, I'm one that I'm usually quick to try to jump onto a form of communication. But I think there's definitely valid reasoning behind hesitancy to use a new form of communication. I'll give you an example. A pastor contacted me about a year ago. I launched a personal page on TikTok with me just doing teaching in Wolof, and I was sharing what life is like here. So the way TikTok works, okay, is it's going to show different videos. The algorithm shows you videos of either the country that you're in, okay, or things that you and other people you follow are interested in. And so the more you watch certain types of video, the more the algorithm picks up what kinds of videos you are watching, or they simply show you videos from people in your region. So we're in a Muslim country where
regional, right?
Right. So we're in an area of the world where modesty, immodesty really isn't an issue, right? I didn't know that TikTok in the United States is pretty raunchy. Okay. I was amazed by the response I was getting from my TikTok account. I have about 55,000 followers here in Senegal. I get recognized. It's funny. I'll get recognized once or twice a week when I'm out and about, either in the capital or here. But it's an amazing opportunity to be able to share the gospel. I've gotten into many conversations about the gospel through it. So I shared that on Facebook. How, man, I'm reaching a lot of people using this, during the pandemic. And a pastor reached out and said, "Hey, we try to steer our teenagers away from using TikTok. I've actually told them not to use it." And I said, "Oh, I like it. Can you give me like reasons why?" I would love to hear why. And he explained that. And I thought, well, that makes sense. Like where you're at, it's pretty raunchy. It's going to be a lot of nonsense on there. In fact, I listened to an interview the other day. TikTok is an application that was made in China, and it's owned by a Chinese corporation company. They don't allow any of that in China, any of that nonsense and half all this nonsense, right? So what you'll pick up in China is more educational. Kids are going to be watching engineers and scientists and all this stuff. They're trying to educate their population. Whereas in America, you got girls just dancing a bunch of nonsense and guys doing a bunch of nonsense, wanting to get famous, right? And so I totally understand the hesitancy of not wanting to use something like that. And so I don't publish that as much. Of course, I'm saying I use it here on this podcast, but I'm explaining my reasoning for it because immodesty isn't an issue on that platform. And here's what's interesting, though, is once TikTok became a thing, every other social media uses that format. On Instagram, you have Reels. On Facebook, you have they have their form of it. YouTube does shorts. Right. So every different social media is jumping on that same bandwagon if it's successful to try to get more views. And so, you either have to totally just cut it out completely, or what I believe is you have to have you have to develop a standard, a reason behind it, why you're using it. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think, though, sometimes the hesitancy, we wait a little bit too long to use some of these mediums. So a lot of pastors pre-COVID would have never done a live stream service. They would have never gone online. But as soon as everybody had to go home for a few months to a year, everybody switched over. And it was exciting to see pastors and churches immediately jump on board and begin to use social media as a means to communicate the gospel. And I think in the past 2 years, because of the pandemic and the lockdowns, which most of them I think were just unnecessary, but it allowed more content that is gospel centered to be produced and put out there online than ever before, because the people who jumped onto social media first were mostly charismatics and those with doctrines that don't line up necessarily with scriptures. We need good Bible teaching that's available and easy to find online. And so I'm a big fan of using different means of communication and technology to communicate. I think that you should set a high standard, of course. You should have principles that guide its usage. And I think more importantly, before we get into some of the more details, I think we need to teach our young people how to use these forms of communication with biblical values and principles. A form of communication today is going to be obsolete when they're adults. So if you, and here's what I'm saying, and let me know what you think of this. If you tell your kids just TikTok is wrong, don't use it, but that's it, you just leave it there. Well, in the future, when they're older, some new form of communication is going to come up that you can't even imagine yet, that you can't even cover. Yeah. So I think it's more important to teach the proper usage of the social media, to learn to be disciplined in its usage, rather than just making blanket statements about, well, we don't do that. But developing principles for guiding us in how we use those. And so what are some pros and cons to using different social media that either you've seen in your own experience with young people and as a pastor, or potential, cons to using it? What are some of the pros?
Well, before I get to that real quick, I would say one of the things that you were mentioning that I wholeheartedly agree with is this idea of throwing everything out and saying, don't use that. And then, like you said, later on, you end up using it or whatever. But I think really the principle here, especially with kids and church members, is discernment. I grew up in an age where you could easily avoid seeing pornography or bad, magazines. I remember specifically a store where my father wouldn't let us go because they apparently had those. And so we could avoid that. Well, when I moved to the Dominican Republic, there's posters everywhere and things. You have to teach your children how to be discerning, to avert their eyes, and that it just become more and more prevalent in our world as we have things in our own hands now. And so, with that being said, yeah, I would say probably the number one thing, and we probably all don't want to necessarily talk about this, so I'll be the first one to confess my sins of just time wasting, okay? That's just the reality of it. And unfortunately, for those of you who have an iPhone or an Apple device, every week, it's so funny for me. It's Sunday morning when I'm in the car getting ready to go to church. It sends me the notification that how many hours I've spent on my phone every day.
Right.
It's like the most convicting message that God sends through Apple every week. And thankfully, some weeks are better than others. But I think that needs to be said. With that aside, those who can control their time to a reasonable time, obviously we spend a lot of our time communicating with church members, but I wouldn't say the majority of our time. As far as so that is obviously a bad use of your time if you're not, reading the Bible or praying or connecting with others in a positive way. We often can spend our time just wasting it. I'll be the first one to say that. But also, I would say with young people, and I'm sure those who are listening to this message who live back in the United States probably deal with this more prevalently, but there's become a way to disconnect from the world itself. Now, I'm old. Next week, I'll be 44 years old. I think that's right, 44, I can only remember. And I remember recently reading something about the metaverse, and I did some research, and I started watching, there was this thing on, I think, CBS Morning that was talking about people going to church in the metaverse. And, we can't, because we're older, even comprehend how this is just now ingrained in young people and how they are looking forward to the disconnect of real relationships. And obviously the pandemic is something that's going to expedite that. And so I think it is a core means of communication. And I think in the future, in this podcast we're going to talk, it's one of the reasons why I don't try to have major debates of any kind, with the exception of maybe a baseball debate, which I think is okay. Any kind of doctrinal or political debate with somebody when they can't see my eyes or hear the tone of my voice. And so I think it's really important that we understand that there are great benefits to this communication, but there can be great hazards and downfalls, and some of it can just be that you're misunderstood. And if you're a Christian and you're trying to reach out to other people, that's important that people understand your true heart. And then, of course, we can just talk into those who are desiring to be famous, and those who are, I know, post-pandemic here, there are a lot of pastors who, unfortunately, a lot of their church members never came back. And though it was a great blessing to connect with their church members during the pandemic in a way to share the gospel, we understand that those fringe members now don't mind sitting on their couches. Now, that may not be a big problem, and it may not be a con that weighs so significantly that you wouldn't do live streaming. But for instance, in our church, I don't do live streaming. I actually tape the church broadcast and put it up later in the day, because I feel like there is something really special about being in the church service live that I don't necessarily want to give to people who want to sit on their couch. So that might just be me.
No, I think that's a great usage of that you put it up later. We do the same thing. We used to live stream back a while back ago. Our internet's so unstable here that it's usually poor quality if we're live streaming. And so those of you listening, our internet cut out 3 times already since we've been recording this podcast. And so I don't know how it's going to edit together, but hopefully it'll work. But yeah, it's, it can be abused for sure. And we saw that happen with the pandemic, where churches moved online, but then a lot of people became comfortable with sitting on their couch and watching church. And I've tried to, I've written a few articles and shared different thoughts about, I'm really big on using media as a tool for communicating the gospel, because any form of communication, any medium is a tool we should use. As long as it is a reflection of Christ, it's not an inappropriate medium. But I think we need to try to communicate Christ as effectively as we can, efficiently as we can, and yet at the same time, we cannot allow the media. It's a means to an end. It's not the message itself. In other words, live streaming church is not church. And I think some people got comfortable with, well, I could just do church at home. The metaverse is something that blows my mind. Now, if you can use, an online service to engage somebody with the gospel, but it's not church. Like, you can't baptize somebody in the metaverse. You can't give somebody the Lord's Supper in the
Although
metaverse.
They're doing that. I've seen videos.
It's crazy. Yeah. So it's not church, but at the same time, it can be an effective tool to engage people with the gospel, number one. And number two, it can be an effective tool to for those who are invalid, they're not able to get to church. It can be a blessing to them. Somebody wrote me recently. I did a post a while back, and I just kind of wrote out, look, we use social media to share the gospel and to evangelize. But basically, it just talked about it does not replace church, and just talked about the importance of gathering and this and that. Well, it got shared by quite a few people, and people were sharing around online. And it ended up, somebody that I don't even know in Wisconsin wrote me on Messenger, and she said, I have to say, I don't agree with your post. And I thought, I don't even know who this is. And I don't even know what post she's talking about. So I said, can you share with me which post you're referencing? And she said,
I said lots of stuff. Which part do you disagree with?
Exactly. And she said, well, the one about, church and not, online is in church. And she said, somebody sent it to my parents. Both of them are elderly and they can't leave the house for public worship service. And she said they sent it and just was really rebuking my parents for not going to church. She said, my dad was a deacon for 50 years and my mom taught Sunday school. And I said, that certainly was not my intention. That was a generalization that look, church is church. You cannot redefine church. Okay. They've redefined a lot. They're redefining what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man. They're redefining what a vaccination is. They've redefined what a pandemic is. They've redefined natural immunity. And they're trying to redefine church, and we're not going to let them. But I wrote to her and I said, I said that my intention obviously doesn't cover the exemptions. There's always an exemption to the rule. And I said, it wasn't my intention to have somebody use that to try to guilt your parents. Obviously, I said, I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather, who was my pastor, we would go visit people who couldn't leave their home, and we would drop off cassette tapes of the Sunday service. And so it's the same thing. It's the same principle. Yep. It's nothing new. So obviously with everything we're saying about social media here, there's always going to be an exception, to the rule. But we do want to emphasize that it's a tool. It's not the work itself. Okay. You can build lives with it, but it's just one of many tools that should be available for spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so it is important. Have you seen missionaries? I'm going to ask two questions. First of all, have you seen missionaries get in trouble using social media? I have. I got in trouble myself using social media.
What?
Yeah. Well, more emails. Have you had any incidents where maybe you posted something, you kind of got some pushback, or maybe you didn't mean to post something, or somebody contact you?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. I, from day one, have been probably the most vanilla person when it comes to posting, and that's on purpose. So
right.
I play it very safe. Like I said, with the exception of maybe my strong opinions about baseball. In that case, I'm willing to fight. No, and I say that because it's tongue in cheek, saying that I really don't think that's that important. So if I'm going to tease somebody about it, I don't mind. We can, it's inconsequential what I kind of think or believe about something as foolish as baseball. But when it comes to social media, I have seen a number of missionaries who get pushed back or get into, very heated debates. And listen, I think of the scripture, and this is kind of what's guided Holly and I, because she'll often say, should I comment on this or that? And I say, you know what? Be a wise as serpents, harmless as doves. And I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, because I think we might share different opinions on this. But I'm a big fan, and it's probably because of my age. I don't even I do like on the WhatsApp app that you can do the voice memos. I hate texting where someone can't understand the tone of my voice or see my eyes, because I think it's very important as a Christian, if you're conveying something of importance, that people understand truly your spirit about it. And you just don't get that sometimes with 140 characters or whatever it is now in Twitter, or just jumping on something. People get so confident online to say things they would never say to your face or on a telephone call. And I think as believers, I have seen a lot of missionaries get in trouble for that kind of thing, and it's just another proof positive of the direction I want to keep. Wise as serpent, harmless as dove.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's the safe route to take, and then there's the route of,
stir in the nest.
Yeah, and I think definitely a missionary's role, I think using social media, I try to use the same principle that I use when I preach at somebody's church, okay? Which is, I'm not there to fix this church. I'm not there to fix it. I'm here to simply, I'm going to post things I'm going to preach about missions, share about missions, talk about my family. And, but I've gotten more in the past couple of years, especially with the pandemic. I share a lot of my thoughts just as they're coming. A lot of them I'll write down and then I delete. Okay. But I try to, because I think.
So you actually have a filter.
Yeah. Because, okay, I've evolved in how I use social media, because when we first started using Facebook, I signed up for Facebook. Okay. So that family could see pictures of our kids, right? It was a great tool.
Sure.
That's probably why a lot of missionaries signed up. Hey, let's open it up. Now, this was back when Facebook first came out. And a lot of pastors right away they were not only hesitant, I heard pastors preaching against it. My personal opinion was that social media, yes, it does, and the internet in general, it does make bad things more accessible and more easily accessible. That's for sure. But I don't think it makes the human heart any more wicked. It simply exposes, especially social media, it exposes the reality of people's lives sometimes. Now, sometimes people put up just they're fake on social media. They put a lot of just, we're always happy, we're always good. They take 50 pictures and only put one picture up. That's the best angle with the best lighting. So social media can be very fake. But at the same time, when it first came out, I think a lot of criticisms pastors had toward it was they're saying, well, people are posting pictures of them going, to this place or doing that or going there. We preach against that in our church, and they're listening to that kind of music and they're posting it. And I think a lot of pastors and people who were kind of against it at first, it wasn't that the people in their church weren't already doing these things. It's that now it's out there for everybody to see. And maybe it was a little embarrassing. What do you think? Now, we're going way back. Social media, since that point on, I don't know of any pastor or anybody who's against social media in general, unless it's just like it's a waste of time, which you're right, a lot of times it can be. But did you sign on to Facebook? Was that one of your primary reasons, to just let family see what was going on and let family see pictures?
I'm just trying to first right now think of the 26-year-old missionary wanting to go on deputation, thinking, man, these guys are dinosaurs. They're talking about Facebook. You know what I mean? No, I know what you're saying. I know we sound so old right now.
And so to even think back, it really was. I think we signed up for Facebook when we got to language school, and it absolutely was a way not only to connect with family and quickly send pictures of what we're doing in Costa Rica, but also to see our missionary friends we had just been with on deputation. I mean, that's really how we thrive with finding out about what's going on with you guys and the Owls, and at that time our buddies the Weavers in El Salvador. And so it really was just kind of this compass, this way to just, keep track. It was kind of like virtual postcards just to see what's going on. I thought it was great. I never understood, probably just like you didn't understand about TikTok, why people would be against it early on. And then things evolve. And I think all those reasons, I think we're kind of talking a lot about things that I think reasonable people understand why there can be an objective against something and something for something. But what I would say is I remember pastors saying this, and this is even when a Dominican pastor is a good friend, used to always do this joke, and he'd do it in English / Spanglish. He would say, you need to get your face off Facebook and your face in the book, and that was just, the idea of reading the Bible. And you know what? He's right. I spend too much time on that kind of stuff, and I could spend more time. And so those truths that they had problems with 10, 12, 15 years ago are still true. And so I think ultimately we have to be careful of all those things when it comes to medium, because I know you know this better than me, but I can spend too much time working on a project with a tool, and at the end of the project go, was this really that successful? Now, I don't have 50,000 people on TikTok, so you certainly have a great point of view to say, I can put some Bible verses out here, I can put out a testimony, and we are really going to reach people. And I think that is the other side of the coin, that you can say, we can use this for an amazing tool to do what I could never do in a lifetime, knocking on 50,000 doors. How is that even possible? I mean, what kind of time is that going to be? In an instant, I can share the gospel. So I think this is something that level-headed, wise people can see both sides. And really, just as we talked about with family, you just have to find the right balance, have discernment, and use wisdom.
How serious should we, and maybe church members and pastors in general, how serious should we take a personal page? All right. And what I mean by that is missionaries, and I'm speaking to you if you're on deputation or you're on the field, already my wife expresses this a lot. I don't mind it. I don't mind the public eye. I don't mind being scrutinized. I don't mind if people push back because I want to know if I'm wrong. First of all, I want to know if I'm kind of saying something wrong or doing something wrong. I don't mind if somebody pushes back at me or scrutinizes me or things. That doesn't bother me. But my wife has expressed this several times that being a missionary, especially if you're on deputation or furlough, it's kind of like living in this fish tank where everybody's watching you. Everybody's watching your kids. You're being evaluated all the time. And I get that. That's part of the nature of doing that. And I remember she primarily uses social media for two things, my wife, for sharing pictures of family. Okay. So our family and friends can see things going on with family. And then she does like a multi-level marketing type deal, MLM, on the side. And so she has like a business page, and then once in a while on her personal page, she'll share things, beauty products that she sells. And so I remember a while back, a few pastors sent out communications to their missionaries, basically saying, and I heard it, different pastors speak about it and address it at churches. They would say it, missions conference, talking to missionaries. So I heard this several times. They would say, you need to be careful posting so much of family and vacations and fun stuff, and post more about ministry on your personal pages. And to me, I understand where they're coming from. I never took my personal page that seriously, like in the past. I thought, well, like this isn't my ministry. Facebook isn't my ministry. So I'm not communicating ministry. Like with my wife, she doesn't post a lot of pictures of ministry she's involved in. She just posts fun times we do with our kids. So if you go on my wife's Facebook page,
right,
she'll have a month of pictures up there, and it's mostly just the fun stuff we do with our kids.
Just on vacation all the time.
Yeah, and people might interpret it that way. What would you say to a missionary who's kind of struggling with that? Like, how do you decide how to use social media? Because look, I don't think it's realistic to say, I just won't use it. It's the world we're living in, and most people are going to use it.
Absolutely.
Do you think a missionary needs to be cognizant of that? They need to think about what they're posting and try to balance out ministry and social media and family and fun time?
Well, I absolutely do think you need to be cognizant of it. I think having an approach of laissez-faire, not caring, would be not wise with any part of your ministry that you're putting out there, because you are purposely connecting yourself with so many churches. Now, I will say, I think what we're talking about with this segment of people who may put out there, you need to be careful, or there's been blowback, I think we're talking a little bit about a straw man in the sense that it's probably not a lot of people. I think most churches and people understand vacations and all that, but I will give you a perspective that may help you understand this a little bit better, because I do understand that pushback, and I'll give you an example. Where we live here in the Dominican Republic, in our neighborhood, it's a very nice neighborhood. In fact, our house is a very nice, comfortable 4-bedroom house, not very large, has tall ceilings, but it's very nice. But it's a very safe neighborhood. Now, I have some neighbors who have very large homes. It's a very secure neighborhood. And so we have had, in the past, people come visit on missions trips who, I'll be honest, I know they had to scrape together the money to come on this missions trip. They probably live, some of them, in very humble homes in rural areas. And for them, as soon as we drive into my neighborhood, it's like, whoa, what on earth? Where are we? I sacrificed to give $50, $100 a month so this guy lives like in Beverly Hills. Well, I don't live in Beverly Hills, but my neighbors have some big houses. But I live in it primarily because it's a safe neighborhood, okay? And so one of the things I used to have to do right away was to try to explain to them, even before they'd even ask, because I knew what they're going to be thinking. Look, I'm renting this house for $500 a month. And then as the dollar got stronger and the pesos got worse, I was paying like $350 a month on rent. I'm like, they can't go find a house in the projects or an apartment in the projects for $350. So when you can help them with their perspective, well, I can't do that for everybody when I post something on on Instagram or Facebook about this luxurious vacation I got for $90 a night. I mean, so, and I realize that person, they may have lost their job and they're still committed to Faith Promise. And so I don't think there's anything evil in there. I just think we're naturally going to have some of these thoughts. What's going on with that guy? So for that reason, this is our instance, I'm from a big family, and we started our own Facebook group where we do the majority of our communications as a family privately. And so we have no problem sharing as many photos about vacations and kids doing things in baseball teams and XYZ because it's between family. By the way, I don't feel like you certainly can have another perspective, and I don't think it's wrong. I'm just telling you, I understood that person who would come to visit us in the mission field, who maybe lived in a very humble dwelling, who was faithful to missions, and it was hard for them to wrap their mind around this. And I could explain to that person in the week, and they go see who we minister to. But I think on social media, sometimes it's hard to explain that to everybody.
Yeah, I think when you surrender to missions and you begin that journey, you are in the public eye. You've surrendered to a life of ministry, and your ministry includes every aspect of life that you're involved in. And so social media is a public forum. And if you have connected with supporting churches, supporting church members and pastors, then you need to be cognizant of that and try to strike a balance. Don't always show, all the great fun you do. It's people want to see you're enjoying yourself, but they want to see ministry too. And that's a balance we try to strike. I usually, for a while, I was just sharing family photos. Then I started shifting to doing kind of ministry and family. And anymore, I let Julie post the family photos, and I do a lot of just what ministries we're involved in, ministry things, and then just different biblical thought. It's kind of Facebook. Since the pandemic, Facebook has turned into my kind of a place where I can go and just vent and just write things that I'm thinking about. And a lot of it comes from just the perspective of being on a mission field. And as I study scriptures, a lot of my messages that I preach, there'll be thoughts the seed thoughts I'll throw out on Facebook. And it's a place where you just get it out and just say it. And so, you really have to look at it as a ministry, I like your idea of opening up like a personal group where you could share with your family and, put whatever you want on there. But if you're on a public forum, then you need to be cognizant of that. There's a lot of times, like there's things politically that will bother me. And I'll try to, before I click, send on whatever I've written, I try to have Julie read it. I'll say, hey, can you tell me what tone you hear and what I'm writing here? Is it too political? Because I'm more concerned about navigating culture and politics and life as a believer, not whether you're conservative, liberal, or Democrat, Republican. Who cares about all that? How do you navigate this crazy world as a believer? And so, social media is a great platform to be able to share those biblical principles of doing that. So let's go from your personal use of social media. You play it very safe. I'm a little more out there. I do a lot more posting, and sometimes it can get me in trouble.
So basically the synopsis is the internet's bad, right? That's what we're trying to say.
Exactly. Just get off it and turn it off. I don't know.
It's your face back in the book.
That's right. So bless God, get your face in the book, amen. And so, learn to use it in a way that ministers to people is what I would say if you're a missionary.
Can I say one last thing? Can I say one last thing here?
Yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking about this, and I think probably guys who are a little bit younger than us, but probably guys our age too. And this is probably certainly more prevalent, not necessarily on the mission field, but in America. But I think I've seen it. I've seen a lot here as well. Sometimes we have this fallacy that we do have to have everything new. We have to be ahead of the curve on everything. And if we don't, we're never going to reach the young people. I in my 13 plus years here, and then obviously deputation and growing up as a young guy, I will say that more than ever, I see that the thing that young people are desiring from missionaries and pastors are real life connections where you can sit down and answer their questions and not just say, this is the way it is. Show them from the Bible, show them a true sanctified life, but a real life, be willing to admit your errors. And all that other stuff, it's just, if you can use it for the advantage for the glory of God, great, but you don't have to have it. And I think sometimes we might get accused as we get older, it's just like resisting things when really we're just maybe not focusing on the right things, which is real life connections. And I'd be honest, just yesterday, I was talking to my wife about this. Prior to them, letting go of the restrictions in the pandemic, it's been very difficult for us here to have really big activities. But you know what? In many ways, our church has done better in the last 2 years with more people being saved, baptized, and discipled. And I started thinking, why is that? Besides just God's goodness, are there other facets? And I think it has forced us to be more into group-based, even 2 or 3 at a time, one-on-one. And sometimes in our circles, we are more concerned about big things instead of real human interactions. And I think that is something when it comes to social media, we have to be careful of that, to get away from everything that is virtual and the best we can to have real life connections. Now, sometimes that can be virtually, but really that personal touch still resonates with people, and you're never going to get that in a metasphere or whatever it is called. The metaverse. I'm so old. Yeah. Metaverse. I'm so old.
I think over this next few weeks of podcasting, I'm going to do a podcast. I don't think you want to sit there and listen to it. I'm going to do a podcast breaking down the technical and the behind the scenes of what we do with our social media. Excellent. For evangelism. I'm preparing that seminar for our church leaders here. And then I'll share it as a podcast. And so I might just do that on my own. That will be one of the episodes next week, or after this episode airs. The following week, we're going to hear from a pastor. His name is Ryan Hayden, and he's developed an app that is kind of like an Airbnb for missionaries. I love it when technology can be used to help missionaries better do their job, right? And so this pastor has taken upon himself with his company. He has a business that he runs online as well to develop this app connecting church profit chambers with missionaries. I'm excited about that. I hope you'll listen to that and then support what he's doing. And then as well, we'll have a couple more interviews about technology, social media. I'm going to interview my brother-in-law. He is a pastor in Ontario, but he also does some side online businesses with affiliate marketing, web design, things like that. And so we're going to discuss getting a good web design, things like that. And then Eric, probably at the end of all this, will come on and just have a recap. It just kind of close it out. So over the next few weeks, we'll talk about that. If you're listening to this podcast and you have a question or a comment about social media, technology, ministry, send us a note, send a comment, send us an email. Let us know how you have used social media to advance the gospel in your part of the world. Let us know some of the advantages. And maybe if you have the time, share with us an embarrassing story if you're a missionary of how you use social media and it kind of, bit you in the backside. And so just let us know, write into us, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, well, hey, listen, just don't send it in all caps. We don't want to hear you yelling.
That's right. Let's keep the tone calm here. All right. Well, good. Well, I appreciate it, Eric, and I appreciate your perspective, and especially on let's keep the main focus of ministry, the main thing, which is people. Okay, it's not your computer, it's not technology, it's not social media, it's people. And if you lose that, the sight of ministering to people, and the medium becomes more important than the people you're reaching, then you've lost the entire picture of what you're supposed to be doing. And so keep that in mind as we look this month at technology, social media, and how it can be used. Well, this is Josh Mead from Senegal, West Africa.
This is Eric Johnson from the Dominican Republic.
Thank you so much for listening through the medium of podcast or the medium of Facebook on our page or YouTube. Whatever medium you're using to listen to us, make sure you like and share and leave a 5-star review or a 1-star review. Whatever you think of us, just do what you feel. But just let people know we're out there. And if you think it'll be a blessing. So thanks so much. God bless.